right, all of you who are live, welcome. For those of you who are watching on the record, welcome as well. This is our third alumni chat of fall 2022. I'd love to welcome Sydney Davis and thank her for joining today. Sydney is currently a buyer at Rag & Bone, and previously she worked at Madewell and Michael Kors. And she is a 2015 graduate, and I want to say MSB. Did I get that correct? Because I was scribbling really fast. Yes.
You are correct, yes.
Okay, 2015 MSB graduate. So we're going to move right over to Sydney. And, I remember you, Sydney, from 2015. So when you were thinking through fashion, can you talk us through a little bit about what brought you into the industry and anything that would kind of help build context?
Yeah. Well, first of all, afternoon, everyone that's on the call, and for those who are tuning in, thank you so much for having me, and to Jackie for putting this together and letting me partake. To kind of kick things off, so I actually got into the field when I was a rising junior, and I was a coordinator for new student orientation, and so I was on campus the summer going into school, and it actually kind of started pretty plainly. I was in need of another job outside of working for orientation. And at the time it was CSP instead of CSE. And I ended up working at the Madewell store located on Prospect and Wisconsin. And I worked there throughout my last 2 years of school. And around the time that everyone starts, looking at jobs and things to do or internships their summer going into senior year, I had a really great manager at the store that mentioned that J. Crew Group offered an internship program for rising juniors and seniors in college. So I applied and I was selected. So the summer going into my senior year of college, I came up to New York for the 10 weeks of summer. And I was an intern in the merchandising department in Madewell in women's. So I started there. And then I was, very lucky to get offered a full-time position after graduation. So in the fall of 2015, I moved up to New York and started my full-time position at Madewell, again, working in merchandising, doing women's, I think at that time I was doing leather goods. So all non-apparel in the leather world. And then over my about 4 or 5 years at Madewell, I moved into the apparel categories. I'd also moved back to non-apparel. So there's quite a few different departments at Madewell that I actually worked in over my tenure there. And then in the spring of 2018, I ended up leaving Madewell and I moved to Michael Kors to head up their travel retail wholesale business and also work in our department store wholesale. So for those who may be a little bit unfamiliar of the retail world, there's kind of 3 different creative and also financial sectors of buying, sales, and merchandising. And merchandising is a little bit more separate from buying and sales. Merchandising, you're really we always say you're like the COO to a planner's CFO. So you're the kind of pinnacle point. You work with your designers, your production team, you work with your creative teams like your marketing and your digital partners. And you create this line that you then sell to your internal partners, your wholesale partners, who then have to sell the line to people like Macy's and Bloomingdale's, Dillard's, and so on. But then at some companies, you have a buying division, which is what I'm in now at Rag & Bone. And the difference there is you are buying for your own company. So from merchandising, it basically stems into buying and wholesale. Merchandising is more product focused. You're creating the basics of the line, whereas your wholesale and your buying partners are more so selling it externally to wholesale accounts, or you're buying it for your Madewell stores or your Madewell.com. So, again, from Madewell, I was in merchandising. At Michael Kors, I was in sales doing wholesale. And then now at Rag & Bone, I'm in buying. So I've kind of basically closed the triangle and hit the trifecta of like the creative and financial worlds of the retail industry. So for me, I was really interested in doing that because where I would like to go in my career, it's really important to kind of understand how the decisions you make as a merchandiser affect, how your buying team buys the product for rag and bone stores or ragandbone.com. And in turn, how your wholesale team is selling the rag and bone line to our wholesale accounts, again, like Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom. We sell to Shop Up and Revolve and so on. So sorry, I think it can be very granular, but it's about as like top level as it can be.
No, that's amazing, because one of my questions was going to be on the various roles, because folks who maybe are just starting, merchandising, buying, what does all of that mean? And so that was a great high level. This is what it is in a nutshell. So I want to go back to what you originally said, is that you worked at Madewell, you did retail, like starting off. So I'll have students at least, in the beginning stages, if they want to go into fashion, the question is like, what should they start doing? What does that look like? And what can they do maybe from sophomore year on? Would you recommend working in retail, certain classes, anything that you could think of that might be helpful for the undergraduate students or the grad students that are in the call that might be looking for a transition?
Yeah, I think in terms of academia, in my opinion, I don't think they were around when I was at school, but if Charles Scuba is still on campus, which I'm pretty sure he is, he offers, I think, a global retail marketing class, which I think is really important. I think some of your like core marketing courses are also important because you kind of get to understand like the landscape of that world. And although it might be a little bit more focused on, consumer behavior, that is still an important science to kind of understand like what is shaping a customer's decision into buying something. I also have to say, Excel. I know all the business school students have to take their like, what is it, 1 credit Excel course. Very, very important. I very strongly disliked Excel when I was at college, and I use it every day. It is my best friend. And so there's a ton of useful tools and shorthands that I use all the time. And then also, honestly, even like a micro and macroeconomics course, again, depending on your study, some of that is required. Really understanding supply and demand and how, for instance, like I think a couple months ago, like Walmart was doing like a huge sale. And even though Walmart doesn't necessarily play into our rag and bone customer, it was something we were all talking about because in a way the market does align. The market trend does align across different segments, whether that's commoditized retail, contemporary, or luxury. Like we talk about when Amazon does like their Prime Day, again, like we're not sold on Amazon, but we do offer our goods to Shop Up, and they obviously have a partnership with Amazon. So kind of understanding, I think, some of the consumer behavior habits, but also being able to quantify some of that, the qualitative data via, honestly, Excel. And then outside of academics, I have to say, in the retail industry, what a lot of people don't understand is the people who work in stores actually have the hardest job. We obviously at my level, we don't work day in, day out with customers, whereas associates in the stores are the people on the floor selling the goods. Like they have to sell that dream in a way. And so I think I really enjoyed working at the store I was there. You can do it part-time depending on some of the stores that are located in your campus. But I think it's really important to kind of understand, like, what is it like to sell these goods on the floor to a customer? Like, how does a customer perceive the brand, the product? How do, certain shopping behaviors change from week to week, let alone season to season? And I definitely know that that's like something I reference all the time now working in corporate. And it's definitely like a good kind of experience to have in back of mind.
Great, thanks, Sydney. So, I was debating my next question, whether it was going to be networking or timelines, because I think I'm going to lean into timelines, because if there's anyone that's in the business school or just quite frankly on Georgetown's campus, then you're seeing the recruiting that's going on right now, which is it's intense. So maybe, you know, if you cast your mind back, knowing that the timelines can be different, maybe just talking about your experience with that, and maybe advice for students who are seeing finance consulting on campus now and would prefer fashion.
Yeah. If you're a rising junior, like if you're, I guess, a current sophomore, I would highly recommend applying for things the summer prior to junior year. Similarly, if you're a rising senior as well, I feel like most people probably get internships going into their senior year. But I think with the landscape of things now, it never hurts to be a little bit of ahead of the game. I think if you're probably a rising sophomore, that might be a little bit tougher just because you are a little bit of a younger age gap. It doesn't mean I'm not going to sit here and say don't apply to things because quite frankly, you never know. In my internship class, it was mostly rising junior seniors and post grads. So that's just how it was back in 2014. But my recommendation would be to always apply. The worst that someone can say is no. And I have been told no many, many times in both my internship and like my full-time professional career. And I think it's always important to get your name out there. It's important to get experience interviewing with people, speaking to people who are in corporate. And so, you know, now, I guess no matter what age you are, I feel like it might be a little bit early to start applying for things next summer in terms of an internship. But I would say like come spring in January, February, I would definitely just apply to anything you might be interested in. And if you're not really sure, outside of something like design, which I feel like is pretty specific, you know, if you might want to be in marketing, but also maybe you want to focus on something like digital, or maybe you want to try merchandising, I say apply to all. I like played around with marketing, but then I also was like, oh, maybe I just want to go straight into like sales or buying. And then I was like, actually, no, I want to go into merchandising because I love product. I would say like send out as many applications as you can, because for every 10 applications, you might get one or two responses, and that's just more experience you get, you know, and a better foot in the door, I guess I would say, in the industry at companies.
So along with those timelines, and I have to say they are getting a little earlier, the summer ones, I think, as they're trying to compete with consulting and finance. So there are things like Urban is open, Bloomingdale's is open. So
Mhm,
FYI, for
mhm.
those of you who are on the call, keep your eyes open. Networking, what is that like in the industry? Important. I feel like I always say networking is relationship building. So it isn't supposed to be transactional. It's supposed to be something that builds. But maybe if you can speak to your experience with it.
Yeah. To be quite frank, when I was at school, there was very little networking for like the retail consumer goods industry. I remember myself and I think about three or four fellow female business school students were like, we want to go into cosmetics or we want to go into retail. We like actually, I feel like kind of laid a lot of groundwork. I know one of my friends was part of the initial GRLA. I think it's still called the Global Retail Luxury Association. And she was a key player in getting that group started. And now she works, I believe, at Estee Lauder doing Dr. Jart. There's a couple of other people that work at L'Oreal. And then I have a couple of other friends who are still at like the Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom's, on the Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom teams. I think it's similarly to the application process, really about getting yourself out there. I might have found one fellow alum and I, connected with them on LinkedIn and I asked about doing like a coffee chat or, at this time meeting in person. And I also think like anytime there's any sort of, I guess, event on campus, again, if you really are interested in the retail association, if GRLA is promoting something, I would go, because I also think it helps kind of form a better idea of like what being in this industry is like. I also think connecting with you, Jackie, like if there's positions that maybe people are a little unsure about and you have better transparency into things, I would definitely, work with the Career Center. But I have to say, it's kind of a hard question for me to answer because we really didn't have that much networking there. And I know that's why like I'm always such a big proponent of joining things like this because there's not a lot of representation, I think, in the retail and the consumer industry, especially in the business school. But I would say like however you're able to connect with alum, whether that's reaching out to someone, and what most students, at least I thought, is that it's actually very flattering when you have people who are coming to you and asking for advice, or insight into what things are like in the industry. So I would definitely say like please don't be afraid to contact people. It's definitely a form of flattery, and it's a huge, I think, privilege to be able to connect with people and help kind of create this platform that again, I didn't really have, just 8 years ago when I was doing this.
Great, thanks, Sydney. And yeah, it's fantastic. And I have to say, alums are usually very generous with their time. If they have the time, they'll give it. And so always grateful for alums who come back and do these things. And yes, please reach out continually to alumni. So two things I was thinking, and they might be related. One, I was thinking emerging trends. So things that you're seeing that FYI, folks, if you're interested in this industry, you might want to know that this is out there. And then how COVID has changed the industry. So I feel like that there could be a relationship out there. So if you just wanted to riff on those two things.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. Current trends and what was it?
Yes, the emerging trends and COVID and how COVID has changed the industry. And I feel like there might be a relationship. There might be things that are related to both. Yes. So if you just wanted to riff on those two things, great.
Well, so I think the biggest thing is, entering COVID, I think the retail industry really scaled into a more casual and relaxed part of retail. It was all about, what can you wear at home and being comfortable. So, sweats and jeans and t-shirts and a lot of like wear to work clothing kind of, significantly downtrended. But now that we're kind of coming out of COVID, we're having to slightly right size things in a way where people are no longer necessarily shopping that way. And we have to kind of figure out, okay, like what's still important coming out of, basically a 2-year significant shift, and how do we right size that? And I will say like, it is not perfect. I currently own the denim and tees world at Rag & Bone. So, my counterpart on the women's team, she does all other ready to wear. So we're currently seeing like a huge business coming out of our jeans and tees and moving into things like pants and shirts and blazers, because people are actually having to go back to the office. It's not just, working from home anymore. And so I think it's kind of understanding like what is important to protect now that we're going back into like almost a pre-COVID era of how and habits of how customers are shopping. Similarly, I think with like non-apparel, you didn't really have a lot of people who needed to buy handbags because like where were they going? But I actually have to say, when I was at Michael Kors, our business was actually up to 2019, which is pretty big because 2019 had no effects of COVID. So the fact that our COVID business was trending to above a pre-COVID year was pretty insane, but it's because people had, that disposable income in some ways to buy a handbag. In the footwear world, people were significantly shifting into things like sneakers or sandals, something a little more casual, not necessarily your again, more wear to work friendly styles like pumps or boots or things like that. So I think it is very specific, obviously by company and what, you offer as a brand, but then also I think even by division and category, and understanding that like maybe men are still shopping in this like casual spectrum versus women have really evolved from, jeans and tees and are now moving back into more wear to work friendly styles.
Thanks, Sydney. And so we got a question in the chat about how the merchandising landscape has changed or is changing with more sales moving online than in stores. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, and that kind of overlaps with my buying, with the buying world as well. You'll notice that again during COVID, a lot of people, when companies started shutting their doors in brick and mortar, started moving a lot of their sales forecasts and plans and inventory into e-com because people were obviously just shopping online instead of shopping from a store. Now that we're moving into this post-COVID era, again, you'll see that we're kind of having to be a little bit reactive in right sizing those expectations by channel is what we call it. So you have your e-com, your online versus your store, your brick and mortar. And that's because, people are getting out there. They want the experience of shopping in a store. They want to be able to touch and feel the product. They want it right then and there. They don't want to wait 5 to 7 business days. They don't want to take a guess that they might have to return it. So it's shifting it by channel, again, back out of e-com into stores. Whereas, I guess to give you some data behind it, pre-COVID, your business might have been split like, let's see, maybe 30% in stores, 70% online. But I apologize, 30% in stores, 70% online. During COVID, that switched. So obviously, you're making a lot more revenue coming out of e-com over stores, but now again you're having to like right size that back, but it's not as much of a disparity between the two channels, so it might be more like 50-50 or 60-40. But then you also have to, a lot of companies are kind of evolving their digital platform. Like Rag and Bone just launched a new website, I think back in July, and knowing that e-com, your online store, is like your biggest store. That's how you can reach the most customers. So you might be adding more product online than you might be in stores because maybe you're having to cut back your brick and mortar footprint, but you want to still offer certain product that you might just not be able to fit in a store. So you're going to put it online. And that's certain things where, like, if you're unsure of a customer's shopping habits, like maybe she hasn't fully left this casual, work from home style, you might still offer things that will fit that lifestyle online. But in stores, maybe you're going to shift a little bit more into this like buy now, wear now, or where to work.
Thanks, Sydney. And as I don't see any other questions in the chat, I feel like the question I always end with is any last words of advice, words of wisdom for folks who are trying to transition or starting into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like, if you're still in school or a recent post grad, it's like you're never too old to pivot in a way. So I think if there's a couple of different interests you want to look into, or you're not really sure where you might want to land, but you want to be working with product, as I kind of said before, I'm a big proponent of like trying it all. Apply and apply and apply. The worst people can say is no, and it's good to get that experience. I've had many friends who have been buyers like I have been for the last 8 years, and they're now pivoting into a consulting position, or they're going into, they're completely leaving the retail world and they're going into like digital media or something like that that's focused on maybe like tech or something. And so, I've had friends that's not directly related, but friends who are working in the financial services world. I had a friend who worked at Morgan Stanley and he pivoted and is now working for Facebook. And so like, I think it applies to not just this industry, but all industries, that now is the time to kind of test the waters and see what you might be interested in. You're still at an age where like you can pivot and it's not going to hurt your career. Whereas, if I tried to pivot now, it would be really difficult. So I'm definitely a big proponent of trying as much as possible. And then again, not to like beat a dead horse, but get yourself out there. It's always very helpful to have conversations with people who are involved and currently in a role that, you might be interested in. When I was kind of first trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I had conversations with people in particular positions where I was like, actually, no, that's not what I want to be doing. And I think you learn a lot from conversations. And then of course, obviously having the experiences of being in a particular role. And then also, like, lastly, I would say like be open. I think now post COVID, there's a lot of opportunities that people might not necessarily be thinking of, but you know, um, you might get contacted by a recruiter or by, you know, an alumni about an open position, and maybe it's not a brand, or you know, maybe you didn't want to go into women's buying, you wanted to go into men's buying or something. But don't be closed off. I would be really open and accepting of different positions, because there are things that, you know, can kind of shift, and I think you might learn that it's actually something you might have interest in. And like touching on personal experiences, I did not want to go into non-apparel. I hated the idea of buying handbags, because I was like, how many handbags can people have? And, you know, thus far in my 8 years, I've spent 4.5, 5 years in non-apparel. So you know, it's something that I ended up really enjoying being a part of. And I definitely wouldn't have done that had I, you know, said no to potential positions.
Great. Well, Cindy, thank you so much. I know you were running in between meetings. Really appreciate you joining us. And thank you so much for those of you who joined live. And for those of you who are watching, I hope you got something out of it, learned a little bit more about fashion. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording.